You're listening to Encyclopedia Podcastica, a podcast from the Silicon Valley Skeptics.
Hello and welcome to Encyclopedia Podcastica. I'm Hunter Perrin.
And I'm Matt Courtney.
Encyclopedia Podcastica is recorded in front of a live studio audience. That is our wonderful studio audience today. So Matt.
Yes, Hunter.
I was desperately ill recently and almost went to the hospital because I had a very high fever and I didn't have health insurance.
Wow, why didn't you have health insurance?
Because I hadn't yet signed up for Obamacare.
Oh, well, you should do that, except that you can't anymore.
No, it's still. Oh, you mean because the open enrollment is done.
Yeah,
but it's not repealed yet.
Right.
Let's hope that President Trump does not actually repeal it, because it's actually a pretty awesome law, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
Right.
So let's talk about the history of Obamacare.
Don't you want to do the disclaimer first?
Oh, yes. Disclaimer, because this is actually really important. Although we're talking about a law today on this episode, neither Matt nor I are lawyers.
Nope.
And nothing we say should be taken as legal advice.
Right.
So, yeah, that's our disclaimer.
And I want to put in, we're also not doctors. So don't take any, medical advice from us. This is just general information stuff. If you have any specific questions, go see a doctor. We're also not
or a
podcasters.
lawyer, depending on your question. Don't go to your doctor asking, how do I sign up for Obama? Actually, they probably would know.
Yeah, they could probably help.
Yeah.
Look at you started, point you in the right direction.
Anyway.
We're also not podcasters. We're just idiots with microphones.
That's the definition of a podcaster.
Okay, we are podcasters.
Okay, so let's talk about the history of Obamacare.
Okay, so the history of Obamacare, really, we really have to talk about the history of kind of our modern healthcare system, which really starts way back in the 30s. Before the 30s, like the 1930s, there wasn't a whole lot of talk or emphasis on getting healthcare. You just went to a doctor and you paid for it.
And hope that you survived.
And hoped you survived, exactly. But by the 30s, medical science was actually working, and it was starting to get kind of expensive. So you had to think about actually having some sort of system to help people out. So in 1933, FDR actually was publicly exploring doing a publicly funded healthcare system as part of Social Security. It was kind of like a side part of it. It wasn't entirely connected. But obviously, that didn't really work out. And what happened was the American Medical Association, among other groups, is mostly led by the American Medical Association, that attacked it as compulsory health insurance. So they're you're forcing people to buy health insurance, and we don't want people to be required to have health insurance.
Yeah, we only want to require them to have car insurance.
That's right.
Which actually nobody ever seems to get mad about.
I think some people do get mad about that, but it's just we don't hear it. It's not nearly as many people. It's really weird. But basically, by 1935, it was actually dropped from the 1935 bill, which I believe had Social Security in it, but it did not have the healthcare reform in it. So we kind of missed our chance there to actually get a publicly funded healthcare. And on top of that, sort of organized medicine's opposition to universal healthcare has kind of persisted ever since. That's the beginning of that fight, so to speak. And instead, shortly after, hospitals, they're now charging lots of money for actual working healthcare. So they began to develop their own health insurance programs. So like the first one of these like health insurance programs before put together from hospitals was actually Blue Cross, which we still have today, as we know.
I've heard of them.
Yeah, they're kind of a big company, big group. Yeah,
Big Cross.
Right. From there, so now we have like health insurance, and people are starting to actually buy into it, but basically paying hospitals or this hospital group directly for it. Well, from there, they're not getting enough people, so they start going to employers. And basically what they're doing, like employers, they want their employees to have health insurance so they don't die and like they lose an actual useful worker. So they actually offer the health insurance to their employees, and the employers are actually like, they're basically collecting the premiums and passing it on to the health insurance.
Wasn't it also like an incentive where you'd like advertise to your potential employees like, hey, we offer health care too? So
yeah, that's actually, I don't have this written in, but it actually comes a little bit later. So by the 40s, Congress starts like passing legislation to support this kind of health insurance. And also in the 40s, when World War II breaks out, you start having like wage control and price controls and stuff. So to kind of get around some of that, what employers started to do was to offer health insurance as like a benefit. And it wouldn't actually be counted as part of your total pay, I believe is how they were dealing with it. So that's how we ended up getting that. We have the system now where your employers are basically paying your health insurance.
the terrible system.
The
one that when you talk to a foreigner and you tell them that, they're like, what?
Right.
Why?
Yeah. And if you lose your job, you lose your health insurance. Sort of. That was somewhat fixed, but it's still, you basically lose your insurance. And yeah, you'll go over that sort of stuff, right?
If you lose your job, well, I'll go over, I don't know, move on.
Okay. So in 1965, Lyndon B. Johnson helps pass the Medicare and Medicaid Act. And this was really like the first socialized medicine that exists in the U.S. And who do you think attacked this legislation?
Donald Trump. As a how old was he then?
I don't
Baby?
know.
Kid? As a kid. Donald Trump.
He was a kid. No, he didn't. It was actually the AMA, the American Medical Association. Again. But now that we have these health insurance companies, they're also attacking it because, of course, they don't want to lose this income that they have from, older people paying for insurance. And, of course, they called it compulsory and socialized medicine.
I mean, they say that like it's a bad thing.
Right. But they actually got this one passed. So we do have Medicare and Medicaid. Unlike a number of other, there'd been, from that point on, there was like a lot of other attempts at reforming healthcare. And I didn't want to go over like every single one. A lot of them really didn't go anywhere. Big one that most of us remember is, of course, in the 90s when Bill and Hillary Clinton attempted to come up with their health care reform and their program. But there was this other guy. So that was national health care. But each state also has their own health care, their own health laws related. And most of the states usually have like different rules for the insurance companies and everything. Well, in Massachusetts, around 2006, they actually they actually pass a healthcare reform law that I think is officially just named like Massachusetts Healthcare Law of 2006, but most people know it as Romneycare. And that's quite important to our discussion of Obamacare.
Was it called Romneycare before they started calling the ACA Obamacare, or?
I believe it actually was. I'm not
Okay.
totally positive on that, but I believe it was called Romneycare before they started calling Obamacare that. And of course, it was named after Mitt Romney, who was governor of Massachusetts at the time, and its goal was to basically provide health insurance to people who can't afford it. And what they would do is to help these people out is they would use subsidies. So people are still buying from the insurance companies, but they're not actually paying all of it or any of it at all if they're not making any, if they don't have any income. They also created an exchange for health insurance. So this is kind of the beginning of the idea of having some place where people can go online and shop around for your best health insurance, which sounds really familiar to what happened shortly after when the Democrats gained control of Congress and the presidency, and they actually create the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, which passed on July 14th, 2009.
Which was basically Romneycare, just on a national level.
Yeah, I was going to go over that, but it was very, very similar to Romneycare. It had the same idea of basically using subsidies to help people who aren't making enough money and can't afford insurance. They have subsidies, and they have the exchange that people can go to shop around for the best price, and a number of other things from Romneycare. There were some minor differences, but I believe the major parts of the program were nearly identical. And so the ACA, which became known as Obamacare for short, or basically, it was actually 1,000 pages long. It was a big program, big plan. And originally it included a public option, which was basically the government was going to offer insurance similar to, I assume, Medicare or Medicaid, but it would actually offer it on the exchanges, and it would compete with all of the other private health insurance companies.
Kind of like the U.S. Postal Service competes with UPS and FedEx and DHL and all that.
Right.
So it's already a proven model.
Right. Yeah, and it works. But not everybody liked that, and
unfortunately,
just to be on the safe side, they ended up removing it to make sure they can get votes from like the moderate Democrats. They also removed it to try and capture like moderate Republicans, but as we'll see, that didn't work out so well. But on November 7th, 2009, the House approved its version of the ACA and passed it like 220 to 215 votes. So it was pretty close. And on December 24th, 2009, the Senate approved its version, and it wasn't as close. It was actually a 60 to 39 vote. But pretty much all of the Republicans voted against it. All but one Republican voted against it. The one that didn't vote at all. He abstained. So the only people voting for it were the Democrats. And the Democrats needed this 60 votes to avoid a filibuster. Having the 60 votes makes it filibuster proof, which would have allowed the Republicans to totally block it. And for some reason, even though it was totally based on Romneycare, they really wanted to block this law. So finally, well, now you have actually two different versions of the bill, and that's a problem. So on March 21st, 2010, the Senate amended their version of the bill, and it was approved by the House, this time 219 to 212 vote. And every single Republican voted against it on that second vote.
Why? It's their ideas.
Their idea. And they even, it was supposed to be a compromise, right? And part of the compromise was supposed to be to have the public option in it, but they pulled the public option out. So it wasn't even really a compromise anymore. It was the Republican version.
It was their plan,
It was
and they
their
voted
plan.
against it because
Right.
the wrong person was behind it.
Pretty much. Well, that wasn't quite the end of it. The legislation was passed. It started getting implemented. But then 26 states and the National Federation of Independent Businesses brought a lawsuit against it, took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and basically it was challenging the individual mandate, which was basically part of the law that said everybody has to have insurance. You have to buy insurance no matter what. And that is to offset some of the costs, such as, among other things, the requirement that insurance companies cover people with pre-existing conditions, which before they didn't have to do. And if you had a pre-existing condition, you had a really hard time of getting any kind of insurance.
You can't have one without the other. Like if you prevent them from denying people for pre-existing conditions, then without an individual mandate, it'll cause people to just not get health insurance until they get sick. So you can't have one without the other one.
Right. And there's actually, I don't have it written in my notes, but there was actually an example of this happening, I think in Washington State, where they, before Obamacare was passed, they had a similar system. And with it, they had the same idea of everybody was required to have insurance, and insurance companies were required to cover everybody, even if they had pre-existing conditions. But then the Republicans took over control of the government and got rid of that part of the requirement of everybody having to have insurance. And there were all sorts of stories of people like getting insurance just before, like, say there was like apparently a woman that would get insurance right before she got pregnant or right after she got pregnant. So they were required to cover her. And then after she had the child, stopped paying, got off insurance, and then went without insurance for a period of time, and then did it again, the exact same thing, got pregnant, got insurance just long enough to have it delivered, and got out. And it was a huge expense, and it caused all sorts of problems. But so the ACA was challenged in the Supreme Court, and it actually survived. It survived with a 5-4 ruling. There were some minor things that were found, I think, unconstitutional, but for the most part, the ACA passed without any problems.
And the individual mandate survived.
The individual mandate survived. The Medicaid I think the Medicaid expansion also survived as well. There was one version that eventually allowed states to not expand. They had the choice of not expanding Medicaid.
Correct.
Which is,
yeah,
I believe that was actually one of the court
funny thing
issues.
about the statistics of the states that have done that, the states that have expanded Medicaid are now at an uninsured rate of around 7%, and the states that chose not to expand Medicaid are still at an uninsured rate of around 14%.
Wow.
So
that's a really big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
if you're in a state that hasn't expanded Medicaid, sorry.
Yeah.
You should move to one that has.
If you can. If that's at all possible.
Yeah.
Well, that the Supreme Court, I just wanted to make sure you got the date. It was June 28th, 2012 when it actually got the final ruling. So from that point, Obamacare was good to go. There were some minor hiccups. We all know about the website having a lot of problems when it first came up, and people couldn't sign up. They also ended up delaying some of the provisions for a year before it really...
A lot of people are under the mistaken belief that the website is still...
having problems,
yeah,
but that's not true.
It's not. The website works fine now.
It was only like...
It was like
a couple months. Yeah, a month or two when it first came up. So, yeah, it wasn't that bad at all. Now, it was kind of during, I think, open enrollment, which was part of the problem. But they did eventually fix it. Well, the final, step in this whole journey we've had with the ACA, as now, of course, Donald Trump was elected president on November 8th, 2016. And part of his platform was his promise to repeal Obamacare, also known as the ACA, for those people still confused.
And he's trying.
But he can't really do it himself. What he can do, though, is actually sign legislation if it gets through the House and the Senate.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
And he has a majority in...
Right.
Yeah,
slim majority, but a majority.
Yeah. We can hope that the Democrats will filibuster and keep this law in place, because this law is freaking awesome.
Right.
So we're going to take a quick break. And if you're on YouTube, go to the next video. And wait, I should point at... Can I don't even know how to do that, how to float videos in the video. But if I can figure it out by the time I put this up, I'll put the video right here.
Over my face?
No, in between us.
Oh, we're pointing at it.
Right here.
Okay.
But yeah, we will be right back, and we will talk about the science of Obamacare. Although it's not really science, we're just going to talk about
statistics.
What it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Encyclopedia Podcastica is a production of the Silicon Valley Skeptics, an organization dedicated to promoting science and critical thinking. You can find us on Twitter at SVSkeptics or Facebook at facebook.com/SVSkeptics. You can contact us at svskeptics@gmail.com. If you like the show, please rate us on iTunes.